Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 363 of the podcast. I'm Mark Graven, and we're doing something a little bit different this time. We're going to share video from the conversation. I'm joined today by Crystal Davis. Crystal, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. And how are you?
Oh, hanging in there. I guess
Awesome.
I don't know. I know it's harder to answer that question these
I
days,
know.
right?
I know.
All things
Indeed.
considered, got my health, and we're getting by.
Indeed. Indeed. Indeed.
And so we're recording this, here in on April 6th, and we're going to talk a little bit about Crystal's thoughts on strategies, what's happening these days with COVID-19 and disruptions to business, amongst other things in our lives. But I was wondering if you could just start off, introduce yourself. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, you're sort of like me. You've got a lot of things listed that say some date to present. You have a lot to tell us about that.
Awesome. 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 So, Crystal Y. Davis, and the primary company that's listed there, the Lean Coach Inc., that has been a consulting company that I started about, oh, I think we're in year 5. And that's the primary function of what I do in terms of serving our clients, and basically in the lean space, but a little bit broader than lean in terms of what we do. One, we focus on transforming leadership and leadership cultures. So all people, in my opinion, can be leaders,
Mhm.
right? Not just by position or title. So we work to develop those as we're developing their problem solving skills, and we help companies with their growth strategies, and then we help them to align their continuous improvement and business strategy. So that's the Lean Coach. You'll also see on there your corporate confidants. So I am a certified leadership development coach. And so I often will just do executive coaching.
Hmm.
These are leaders who aren't necessarily interested in lean or transformation or any of that work. They need a confidant.
Mhm.
And I have found in the other work that I do in the Lean Coach that oftentimes leaders don't have a space where they can just be transparent about decisions that they have to make and concerns that they have. And so I serve as that confidant.
Hmm.
And then the newest one actually is MPlus. And so that's actually a managing partnership that I recently joined with a couple of other, well, there are actually 8 of us total,
Hmm.
lean practitioners mostly,
Mhm.
and then some people that actually do work in organizational design and development, leadership. And so we came together as a coalition with the intent that um, we wanted to be able to serve the community in a different way. So people who might be interested in lean, or organizations interested in lean, but they're also interested in how we actually um, deal with people. There are a lot of things that we talk about in the lean community around respect for people, people transformations, behaviors, characteristics, mindsets. And so that's kind of how this coalition of practitioners came together
Mhm.
under this MPlus managing partner relationship. So,
And you're working with some other people I know,
yeah,
varying degrees, if you want to say. Or
yes, they're all amazing. So I'm pretty sure you know Muhammad
Mhm.
and Paul.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, who else would you know?
Sonia.
You know Sonia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And,
Yes.
and, and y'all did a virtual
We
summit
had
last Friday, right?
we had
How
a
did that go?
virtual summit. Oh my God. So we had a virtual summit last Friday, and Mark, the I was glued to my chair
Yeah.
because I had heard, roundabout, of course knew what I was presenting. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about the business impact of COVID-19. But I was glued. The content was just superb. Superb.
Yeah.
I mean, Sonia talked about leadership. She talked about how now is the time where leaders need to, um, put compassion over compliance,
Mhm.
and as it relates to how you measure productivity and performance, and redefining those things. We had a conversation about the 9 signals of a toxic environment and how that plays out in a remote work environment. I don't know how many Zoom calls you've done where people will say things that aren't so nice over
You
the
mean like
last
what?
week.
been a victim of a Zoom bombing because of somebody's happy hour. Is that what you mean,
No,
or
this
just
is
within
actually
meetings?
just as in meetings, whereas, in a conference room setting, you might be aware of being politically correct, whereas on Zoom, you've got other stress factors at
Mm,
home and just not so and just in general, people are stressed. And so people may make comments that are just snide. And how do you manage that when you're working remote, when maybe in the office or the conference room you can go by the coffee machine and say, hey, that comment was probably out of line. I was feeling this well, now that you're remote, it's an intentional phone call or an email. Are people going to do that, right? So just the content was just absolutely amazing. Muhammad actually talked a little bit about this framework that talks about, working in complex problems and crises like what we have today, and how people ebb and flow between simple and complex. And you got to be able to manage all of those swings. We talk about change management. This is not even just change management. This is like, you know you have people who have a whole household full of people trying to get work done.
yeah.
So,
I've seen people's kids and pets
and
and in the background of Zoom meetings,
have you seen those
sometimes in the foreground.
oh yeah, have you seen the ones where the spouse doesn't know they're on a Zoom meeting and they come out in their bathrobe? It's just all sorts
Yeah,
of stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
New risks that we didn't have before. But I'm curious, with the virtual summit, was it always planned to be that format, or was that a reaction to the work from home COVID-19 era?
it was actually, we were planning to do a virtual summit, but we were planning to do it, let's just say like a month and a half from the time we actually did it. So we pulled it together in a really short period of time because we felt like the topic, the fear of leading in uncertain times was so apropos now.
Yeah.
So
And I know it was a live event. I wasn't able to attend. Is there going to be a way for people to pay to access the recordings?
absolutely. They actually met on Sunday. I couldn't meet with them on Sunday to talk about how we repurpose the content and
Mhm.
make that available to people for a low price point. So I will share with you anything that they come up with.
Okay.
But the content was amazing. It
Yeah.
was absolutely amazing.
And I'll put a link to that. It'll be leanblog.org/363 will be
Okay.
the page for this episode, so the viewers or listeners can go find that. For anyone watching on YouTube, I'll put the link in the description
Awesome. Thank you
of
so
the
much.
video here. And then one other thing I was curious about, I thought was an interesting part of the model, because I did, Mohammed Saleh had emailed me about it and asked me to check out the page, and I already had too many things scheduled that Friday. But one thing that jumped out at me, it was sort of a bit of a choose your own price model. I was
Yes.
wondering if you could share a little bit about that, and was that what was the hypothesis with the experiment, or I'm curious how that went, if you don't mind sharing a little.
No, absolutely. So basically we had a price point in mind, of course, when we before all of the shelter in place came sweeping across many states and or counties. And then once it became across the nation, and more governors were getting on board with this, we just decided that based on what we were seeing in the marketplace, a lot of even extremely well-known speakers, authors, content providers were giving things away free.
Mhm.
And so we went away from the model of, here's a static price. We really just wanted to make sure that for the content we had, people had access. And so we made it just a donation.
Mhm.
I think we referenced the price point, but we made it a donation because we talked about how some people, when they see donation, they don't want to insult you, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But it also was one of those things where we didn't want it to be a barrier because people are being impacted so greatly by
Right.
what's happening financially,
Right.
job loss, and things of that nature. So that's how we literally had this conversation like maybe 2 to 3 days before the conference actually launched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's good that you did that because, like you said, there's a lot of people who are out of work or might not have the ability to do that. Yeah, it's interesting to see variable price models. Our friend Karen Ross
Yeah.
does a similar thing when she works with people. She says more or less. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know exactly how she puts it. She asks people to pay what they think it's worth.
They think it's worth. Mm-hmm.
And I
They,
think
and
she's
she
done.
did that pre-quarantine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's been her model, and it's been very successful for her
yeah,
uh, in terms of um, in terms of not setting a particular price point. So
yeah. I mean, I've experimented with that. I've published some books, or at least done the initial publication through a platform called LeanPub, which has a choose your own pricing model. So you can set a suggested price and you can set a minimum. That minimum can be zero.
right.
And then I've seen it's really surprising, like maybe 1 out of 20 buyers chooses to pay more than the suggested price, which is an
Interesting.
interesting dynamic.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So it's interesting to see that you all were experimenting with that here with your virtual summit, and that was done through the MPlus.
Right. That was through the MPlus partnership. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting because we did decide with it moving so quickly, we were just going to treat it like an experiment. We were going to, take our lessons learned, and we plan to continue doing other summits and offering valuable content. And so we'll just, I think we had a lessons learned. Well, we actually started collecting our lessons learned. So
yeah, well, good. I'm sure it sounds like there'll be an opportunity to try it again, and
oh,
every time a little better, right?
absolutely. And it was so much fun. It was really, at first I was a little nervous about it. With 8 people, coming together and everybody gelling. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, good. Glad to hear it. Um, So we're flipping the script a little bit. Like regular listeners will know, like I usually have a pattern where the next question after introductions is to ask, so how'd you get introduced to Lean? And we both had some shared background within the General Motors realm, and I think we'll come and talk about that later.
Okay.
But we've already mentioned COVID-19, and that was one thing we were going to talk about here. So I was just, kind of turn it over to you in terms of what are you seeing in terms of how COVID-19 is disrupting businesses? What are organizations or individuals trying to figure out these days?
Oh, it's been a whirlwind couple of 3.5, 4 weeks for some folks that I'm working with, and even just following other companies. So you have a myriad of things going on from companies, small businesses, and we tend to think of small businesses as just like your kind of mom and pop. But small businesses can have up to 500 employees and make millions. Uh, excuse me. But as it relates to what these companies are thinking about, they're thinking about one, the safety of their employees. Two, they're thinking about, can they sustain the payroll?
Mhm.
Three, do they have enough cash flow to sustain the whole business and all of the other business expenses, whether fixed or variable? And four, do they need to pivot their services with all of the uncertainty around how long this is going to last? And then, most of them are trying to understand if they take advantage of the benefits of the CARES Act, whether that's, through the payroll loan or whether it's through SBA loans, can they actually afford to take on more debt,
Yeah,
right?
even at very low interest rates, but
Even at
still,
very low interest rates. Because if there's no revenue coming in and you already have debt and you already have cash flow issues, that's a tricky bag. And so you see a lot of companies that have already made a decision to lay off, I'll say, non-critical employees. Some have made a decision to lay off critical employees, which I think probably, honestly, my personal opinion is it's too soon. But that's you know I don't say that in judgment. I say that in not having enough information to understand if they just had no other choice,
mhm,
right?
Right.
You don't have the money to pay people, and the payroll information isn't coming for another 5 weeks, right? So, but I think this is a testament um, to how people lead.
Hmm.
And so, one of the things that I've been saying is it takes courageous leadership to stand up to a board and say, no, we're going to hold on to people,
Mm.
and we'll figure out other ways to make revenue on the back end. And so, in my talk at the summit, I talked about these three phases that companies are in right now. One is crisis response, the second one is survival, and then the third being recovery.
Hmm.
And so when you think about the crisis response, like, maybe the first 14 days to 30 days, they're just trying to figure out what they need to be doing, whether that's how can we get people to remote work. Some manufacturing companies are trying to figure out how can we have only 10 people in this one work area or another work area and be able to prove that you can keep people 6 feet apart. And so you just have
Hmm.
tremendous amount of challenges.
Right.
I was reading an article today about you know food producers, like they were getting orders from restaurants and from large grocers, and with reduced hours and all of these types of things. They were getting orders from schools and employers who have cafeterias. All of that has come to a halt. But the food supply is not something you can turn on and turn off unless it's processed food. So there's just a number of challenges that people are faced with, and in trying to figure out what's the next move. And every day things are changing. And
Hmm.
so it's incumbent upon them in terms of being courageous is to be as completely transparent and conversational and open communication with their employees as possible. Um, One other thing that I've heard people are struggling with is how do they measure productivity of the remote worker? And
Hmm.
so I've heard a lot of people talk about a number of, you know, reports that they're having to fill out, or paperwork that they're having to turn in to prove that they're doing work instead of the work being focused on the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So as industrial engineers, I mean, it's easy sometimes. It's easier to track the activity than it is to track the outcome, and in a lot of cases, it's the outcome that matters most
That
for
matters most.
business, right?
That matters most. And then, even some of the folks that I'm working with, I've advised them that with remote work, you need to be more mindful to make sure that the tasks allow you to measure outcome, because people honestly aren't always able to work their static schedule. They may be able to start at 8, but they may have to start homeschooling at 9,
Yeah.
and they can't just take a 15-minute break or take their lunch at 12, with all of the distractions at home. And
Right.
so if the work is getting done and the outcome is there, now is the time for a little bit more compassion as it relates to, if someone was working at 8 p.m. to finish their work, who cares?
Right.
you know but a lot of companies aren't seeing it that way, especially with some really large organizations that are holding on to people. And I think part of the problem statement is, have you revised how you do work and how you measure the effectiveness of the work
Yeah.
and what work needs to be done?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, you mentioned the word compassion, and sometimes people say things like, "Well, it's just business," but we all have a choice in our businesses of how we treat people, whether you use words like respect or compassion.
mhm,
There are different responses in this day and age. Some retailers have been criticized for not paying people who are sick. I'm like, well, wait a minute. During a pandemic, the last thing you want is someone feeling pressured to come to work
yeah,
when they're not feeling well.
yeah,
And some companies are paying, I'll give Home Depot credit on the positive side. I read an article where they're giving people, if you're sick, 2 weeks off paid. No, I don't know if it's no questions asked. There might be a little bit of a question, but putting first things first. And you said mentioning safety.
yes.
That's an important priority, thankfully, for many organizations, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually part of the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act is that, the first 2 weeks should be paid, and then it's up to 12 weeks total, including that 2 weeks, because of that very thing. I mean, like, again, if you're home with a family of four and one person gets sick and you're not even that person, you should self quarantine yourself as not to expose your coworkers, even though you aren't symptomatic.
Right.
And so it's, you penalize this person for protecting you. I
Yeah.
just, yeah, yeah.
And so you talk about these three phases, and I'm curious. There's that crisis response mode, which I'm trying to figure out, am I still in that mode or am I in survival mode as an individual and as a business person? Like, because to me, crisis response is this sort of, oh my gosh, what's going on? Let me just figure out what's going on. What do I need to do? How much risk am I at? And then at some point, maybe you get a handle on it and now you can go forward. But is there risk if an organization or a leader thinks their people are ready to go into phase two and people are still very much stuck in that phase one personally, and everyone's going to progress a little differently based on their circumstances, I
Oh yeah, there's absolutely risk, and the lines aren't so clear. I explain to people that you may ebb and flow between
bet.
all of these phases. Hopefully, not so much crisis response, but between survival, especially in recovery. But
Mhm.
early on, coming out of crisis response, going into survival, you may ebb and flow back into crisis response because we're constantly getting new information. So, for the independent consultants like us, I mean, they just really released what the support would be for our businesses, right?
Right,
And
through the
that may
CARES Act and
Mhm.
the sub programs within that.
Right. They just modified it to include independent and self-employed people.
Right.
So, that may have shifted what you thought your plans were going to be as of last week,
Right. Hmm.
right? um and not necessarily that it's a panic, if you will, but it may shift you back into, well, oh my god, what does this mean
Sure.
for me, right?
Right.
Or how does this change what I do? And then another thing that I've been talking to small businesses about is, in terms of crisis response, you want to have a certain amount of fast start energy around determining how you're going to pivot in your business.
Hmm.
And even if it's a short term pivot, just making sure that you have that intensity around moving now, because if everyone is moving to a virtual offer, you can easily be squeezed out.
Hmm.
If you haven't come up with what problem can I solve for my clients now, or new problems for
Right.
new clients that you can go and help.
So in your coaching work and your of different types, were you already doing, let's say, a virtual executive coaching session through a
Hmm.
platform like Zoom or FaceTime or just the
Yeah,
phone?
all of my coaching, with the exception of the clients that I also have consulting work with, are virtual
Yeah.
and happen virtual. Yeah.
So are there lessons, you've been doing it that way for a while, for people who are new to this mode? Do you have any kind of lessons or tips about being effective in a virtual uh, way of interacting?
Well, I think I do. I think it all depends on your personality. So, I'm not camera shy, and I'm typically, me, whether I'm in front of a camera or in front of you. So, what I try to make sure that I do is that I'm just present, and that the client can feel my presence. They can
Mhm.
feel me engaged in what they're experiencing, so that, they may have certain body language where on camera they feel like they just need to be stiff. I have to learn how to see things, facial expressions, or really listen intently to make sure uh, that I'm not missing anything that I would see if I were sitting directly across from them.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest one. One, you as a coach, just getting comfortable yourself. and then two, kind of setting the stage for the client, to let them know. And then the other thing is I actually engage with them virtually. So as we're talking through challenges, I may pull up a Google Doc, and I'll share it with them. So we're both sharing in that Google Doc, sharing thoughts or ideas, or I may give them assignment and I'll say, hey, for the next 10 seconds, I want you to just write out everything that you're feeling about that situation.
And you have them do that live, so
Yeah,
you see them typing as they're typing.
I have them do it live. So finding different ways to engage with them
Mhm.
as though we were physically there. If I wanted a whiteboard session or any of that, I do it virtually
Yeah.
and create an experience. So it's really about defining what you want your user experience to be, and then show up in that way, and then help them overcome any challenges that they have with being camera shy or all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about pivoting, because I can think of a couple examples. A health system that I have been working with a lot, which meant traveling and flying to that location a couple, 3 times a month. Now doing some support and keeping in touch virtually. But hearing about some of the clinics that have been, one clinic in particular that I've been working with, there was some short-term kind of reactions, some short-term countermeasures that were very necessary. So for one, trying to practice physical distancing, and
Mhm.
this was in a prenatal clinic setting where the mother had to be seen. There's a second part of their pivot related to that, but for patients who are physically there, they're trying to maintain physical distancing and amongst the staff. And I had heard they started using walkie-talkies to communicate amongst staff in different parts of the clinic. And then the feedback, the comment I heard from one of the people there was, you know what, we might keep doing that after things go back to normal, because they found that there was a real efficiency
Mhm.
benefit to that. And then the second pivot is that this health system really made a heavy push toward expanding telemedicine visits.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
thankfully, I think it was just through Medicare, Medicaid. I don't know how the private insurers are handling, but being able to reimburse for
reimburse.
telemedicine visits. That's
Yeah,
something that hopefully becomes part of the new normal, in a way that's not bad financially for the healthcare providers.
absolutely. I had actually read something where a lot of private insurers were, they were totally against it before, and now they're giving into that. So I'm hoping that that's something that will remain in place.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the second example is just more from a local restaurant in Texas that we like going to. It's owned by two chefs who work together, very much a local business. And I don't think they ever did takeout other than doggy bags you might take home, right?
Right.
It just wasn't part of the model, but nowadays, the shelter in place, and now it can only be takeout. They've had to put in new processes. They've had to tweak their menu. They're doing some things that are, and I saw the chef in a Facebook video, which might be part of the pivot, right? They're trying to engage with
Yes.
their fans and their customers in ways that they might not have felt the need to do before. And Chef Bob was talking about, like, take and bake items that they
Right.
had started doing, or half baked and whatever. And in one video, he said, some of this is working so well. I think it's probably going to stay around, because they might be noticing that there's an opportunity to utilize the kitchen in off hours that aren't the lunch peak and the dinner peak, even in
Exactly.
the morning, or they can pay people to make use of that fixed rent expenditure and
Yes.
fixed kitchen capacity in a way that, I mean, it's I'm sure it's tough now, but it might, in the long term, hopefully it helps them recover and not just survive.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that pivots like that are so essential. And you think about how people, for me, what I've thought about mostly is how people have been able to shift their mindset. Things that they would have said no to before, they're so open to right now. and it's opening up so many opportunities. I mean, like, how long has Butcher Box been around, or all of these other meal prep order restaurants could have been doing this, but,
Yeah. They were
right?
sort of stuck in a
They were
comfortable, this is
stuck
the
in
way
a
we've always done it,
Yeah,
right?
they were stuck in a comfortable position. I mean, so I have an example with a plastic surgeon and med spa owner. And the Surgeon General a few weeks ago came and said, all non-elective services. And she immediately came up with a filtered, non N95, but filtered mask, and started producing those under her brand
Hmm.
to just make a shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And shifted more to teaching people about in-home skincare and things of that nature. So it's just figuring out, like, being uncomfortable enough to make this pivot. And it's hard because I know for me, you're passionate about the thing that you started your business around.
Right.
You're passionate about it. And so for me not to be able to go into a shop floor and do things to
Yeah.
touch, um, it's tough, but you know, uh, the times are calling for us to show up in different ways, and so showing up in a way that can still help people virtually make improvements. I was saying to people, I hope even from a lean community perspective that we don't get um, wrapped around the axle of only telling people how to do virtual daily huddles and Gimba and this and that, when there are real problems that these people are facing. Like, they're in conference rooms, virtual conference rooms, making some serious decisions, and it's it's so much of an opportunity for us to show up in a different way, right?
Right. Well, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. We could be pushing instead of measuring different things. We could be pushing activities or listening and figuring out what are they trying to accomplish, or as you put it, meeting customer needs. And we think as lean practitioners, we can be inspired by, there's so many stories about Toyota over time of trying, and other companies as well, of redefining some of what they're doing because they've understood better the need and the job the customer is trying to accomplish. We can do that as consultants, and likewise not be. And I'm trying to reflect and think about this. Do I get stuck in the way I've always done it?
I've
To my
I've
judgment.
talked to a lot of a lot of practitioners who are. I mean, we're so connected to some of our own rules
Hmm.
that we can't get out of our own way.
Yeah.
And we've talked before in the lean community about companies and organizations saying, oh, lean, that's the same old, and thinking they need to be agile or doing something different. When at the end of the day, this is a huge problem. It's creating so many problems so rapidly for people that this is the time we show up to serve as problem solvers,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And so I can't have a 5-day Kaizen. I don't have 5 days.
Yeah.
We have 2 hours to make a serious decision that's going to impact people's lives. How can we do so in a structured way that helps me make sure that I am defining the problem appropriately? Walking, and I tell people, the data from 30 days ago, it's useless.
Yeah.
You have to find new ways to collect data and intel,
Yeah.
right? We have to think like AI thinks. What kind of questions can we ask? What kind of communication can we glean from to make rapid decisions about um, things that need we the problems we need to solve today.
Yeah. Well, and earlier you mentioned, and I jotted this down. I mean, you mentioned experiments. It's not so much of having the solution, but going through these rapid cycle experiments
Yeah,
to test a hypothesis, to figure out what's working or not, refining it, tweaking it, right?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine? We both have a background from GM. Can you imagine them thinking, "Oh, I've got to make ventilators now,"
Right.
right? But then I read an article today that the founder of Dyson, he
Hmm.
designed a ventilator in 10 days.
Yeah, I read about that. I
Now, what
think
was
that,
the design cycle before, Mark? 2 years?
yeah, good. That's a great question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, GM. and the other Detroit automakers have gotten faster in their development cycles. But
10 days?
yeah, I think there's a bit of a race because Tesla, I read, is designing a ventilator that's built based on Model 3 parts. So like
Parts.
the ventilator display is literally the display that would have been in the center of the dashboard. And there's other mechanical parts and pumps. I can just imagine Elon Musk wants to get his brand new Tesla ventilator out to market faster than GM
Yeah.
can get one out, partnering with another company.
Right.
This competitiveness would be, it can be interesting to see how that plays out. I think for good benefit.
Oh, absolutely. But I
Um,
think I think more so than just the ventilator itself, it's going to drastically disrupt design cycles.
mm. Tell me more about that and what you hope will. Mhm.
So, I'll give you an example. So, um going back to Elon Musk. So SpaceX, wants to design things in 6 months. And if you have any understanding of the space industry, it's years before they bring anything because there's so many dynamics that you're dealing with and it's so dangerous, right? And so they can't even wrap their minds around designing something in 2 years, let alone 6 months. But what you see now in this crisis is that, yeah, we may only be talking about ventilators, but we're talking about still a life saving need,
Mhm.
right? And who knows what the numbers will be in terms of people that continue to get sick and test positive for COVID-19. But what we really should be taking away from this is the design process,
Mm. Mhm.
right? Because it's still risky if this ventilator doesn't work.
Right. Right. There's going to have to be FDA approvals, and hopefully some of that is expedited in a way that's not cutting corners, eliminating waste from
Exactly.
the approval value stream.
And
Right.
that's right. From the entire design process, right? And so that's what I think, in terms of, again, like how we show up, we should be documenting and capturing this and making sure that people have ways to identify the critical path and make sure that they just shift their mindset. Can you imagine now, though, for the people who, even when we go back to whatever our new normal will be, those people who continue to iterate and design in these how successful they're going to be?
Mhm.
And what's the risk to those staple companies that continue to take a year, 2 years to design new products? Tremendous risk.
Yeah.
Tremendous risk.
So that's part of going through survival into recovery, in some ways being stronger than we were before.
Stronger than we were before. And the survival phase for what I described earlier, that's really more aligned with somewhat the pivot, but also making sure that you're viable for the next short-term duration, next 6 months, 4 to 6 months.
Right.
Right.
Survival first.
Survival first,
Mhm.
right? And if companies can figure that out, that they have a plan to survive, there may be some loss, right? You might have to ultimately end up laying some people off if we go past the 12 weeks of the CARES Act. Hopefully, they'll come out with more, but it's really about making sure that the company is viable. So the first is, can we save the people? Can we keep people employed?
Right.
Because it's going to spur the economy. But then, secondly, if can we remain viable over the next 6 months? And what kind of short-term pivots do we need to make to do so? Which ones of those pivots will become longer term plays? And then I think that this is also opening up opportunities for people to just pivot, make a complete shift in terms of their offerings.
Yeah. So, if it's all right in the time we've got left, you talked about pivots. You've made some career pivots. So, do
Yes.
you mind going down memory lane a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I got my start in the automotive industry right out of college. And I
Me
started
too.
working. I started working as an industrial engineer um, right out of college. And about 2 years after I graduated, I started working for Packard Electric, which was part of General Motors.
Mhm.
And then probably about maybe 2 years after I started working for Packard, we became after the split.
Yeah.
And so that's where I actually got my lean background. I was working at a plant in Maquiladora in
Mm,
Juarez, Mexico. And we were making oxygen sensors for every single GM SUV
mhm.
made. And during the late 90s, SUVs was all the rave.
Yeah.
And so we used to produce probably about 90,000 oxygen sensors a day.
Wow.
The quality was poor as hell.
The data backs that up, I know, right?
Bad.
I suffered through that type of thing in the 90s at GM also.
It was bad. It was bad. And so with this new separation, we had competition. And so we were placed on new business hold, and GM told us we had to get our act together. And our plant manager said, "Okay, well, we've got these books, these Delphi manufacturing system books. I don't know what they mean. Let me blow the dust off of them." And there was a group of engineers. We literally learned the engineering group, the manufacturing supervisors, and the quality supervisors, production supervisors. We all came together. We read those books, and we just started experimenting. And in about 18, no consultants.
I was going to ask, because where I was at GM Powertrain in an engine plant in 1995, GM had hired some people who were basically internal consultants full time at our plant. One guy was from Nissan, one was
Mhm,
from Herman Miller, I think. A
mhm.
couple were from some Toyota suppliers, and
No,
it was those were incredibly helpful mentors for me. And then we got a plant manager who was one of the original NUMI people.
oh, wow.
He was a GM guy who was sent to NUMI. So then he came in. So that was anyway. But yeah, similar experiences. But so I'm curious then, without those coaches and mentors from the books,
No
what happened
consultants.
then?
No, so we actually, we bootstrapped everything, and in about 15 months, we turned the entire plant around. We remodeled all of the work cells, and let me tell you how bad our quality was. So I had set up a 32-point inspection sale, meaning every oxygen sensor went past 32 sets of eyes.
No vision systems. You mean 32 people?
People,
Yeah. Okay. How many things were there to inspect for? I guess there were that many things, or what?
there weren't, but
Yeah.
and we still had escape,
Yeah.
right? 85%, right? So we ended up turning things around. We created, we put in a lot of poka-yoke, we put in a lot of work cells that we leveraged, touch and go, so that the person wasn't tied to a machine. They could touch, execute, automatic reject, just a lot of things that are
Mhm.
commonplace now.
Yeah.
We put into place, and we turned things around. We became a showcase factory, and that ultimately is what launched my internal consulting career. Because after that, I was, pulled on a team to go around and help troubled crisis facilities. And that's honestly, to be honest with you, that's how I learned so much about the broader business aspect and the people aspect
Mhm.
of lean, because it wasn't one size fits all. I couldn't just stay in that engineering mindset of I'm only focused on the process. And so that launched my lean consulting career internally for
Mhm.
Delphi. I moved around to a lot of different locations until the end of my career at Delphi, which came when the automotive industry tanked. And
During the Great Recession.
during the Great
Yeah.
Recession, I
Yeah.
was laid off, but I actually was able to escape, before that became final. But I was made aware that I was on the list. They had reached that point.
Yeah.
I mean, more than a third of our plant, at the time I was in Mississippi, more than a third of the plant was dark, and we were just losing work rapidly. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so after that, I went to go work at Coca-Cola in their supply chain,
Mm.
and in the bottling distribution aspect. Now, the Coke company, the parent Coke company, had already been on the Six Sigma journey for a few years. The bottling company had not had any real continuous improvement, initiatives going on.
Yeah.
And so I was a team of seven, I think we were, introducing lean to the entire bottling industry, bottling and distribution industry. So from the time we bottled all the way to the shelf was considered the supply chain. A shelf somewhere, a
Yeah.
shelf, a machine, anywhere, everywhere. The system was as big as the U.S. postal system. If you think about everywhere you can find a Coke, it's
Yeah.
huge. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
So introduced the philosophies there, and it really was for me as a practitioner a huge shift. One was getting and seeking the buy-in from the leadership team because they were just told, "Here's what you're going to do,"
Mm.
and then
That's
two,
tough.
oh yeah, and then here, the other thing was continuous manufacturing. Like, you don't bottle one bottle and then stop. It's like, no, 1,200 a minute.
Yeah. That's flow.
That's flow, right? 10,000 gallons of liquid has to go somewhere. And so it was quite intriguing. It tested me. It tested me. And I actually ended up working. I suggested that we work. I had worked with, not at the time of my first encounter with Lean, but I had worked with Mr. Yamada,
No.
Delphi, and we had partnered with LEI on their Lean business partnership. And so Mr. Yamada came in, and one of the things that I found beneficial from him was he was able to have those conversations with the most senior executives where I didn't have that level of influence at the time. And then the other thing was having that one-on-one mentor mentee relationship. I learned things that I'd never seen written in books.
Because Mr. Yamada was like direct lineage from Taiichi Ono,
Yeah.
right? He was like one degree of, so you were 2 degrees
One
of
degree.
separation
I was 2 degrees of
from
separation.
Taiichi Ono. Yeah.
Yes. And and I mean, when you talk about like some of the things we just talked about in terms of challenging mindset,
Mm-hmm.
he challenged all sorts of any type of rational traditional thinking in that system. And we just ended up doing amazing work in terms of supply chain work, and really trying to move them from a push system to a demand driven system.
Mm-hmm.
And so just amazing work there. I was there for about 4.5 years. And then I got the bug to go out on my own.
Yeah.
And I went out on my own for probably about 3 months. And and I let my first client talk me into coming to work for him. And that was Thermo Fisher Scientific. And so that's another really unique business. Thermo Fisher has a lot of low volume, um, high SKU, high diversity product offering. And how do you control the inventory of a reagent? Like, you just don't know how fast it's going to grow or how much it's going to grow.
Yeah. So you went from high volume to higher volume and flow, now to low volume, high
High
mix.
mix. Yep, low volume, high mix.
And now both companies, they probably said, well, hey, we're not building cars here. Was there
Oh,
that
absolutely.
defensiveness or
Oh, yes.
confusion of?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I learned, and through the Coke experience, and I learned through the Thermo Fisher experience, that it didn't matter if I understood what solutions were possible. It only mattered that I helped solve the problems that the leaders identified as problems, to bring them to the table, to then be able to teach them how to see the other things. Huge paradigm shift for me. So I'm
Mhm.
going from a company that, lean is plan A, there is no plan B, to lean is a 4-letter word. I don't care about that stuff right now. You're asking me to reduce less, and I'm looking at my yield on this very expensive syrup. This makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
So, and it took a lot of creativity to help them be able to see things the way that I saw them. I'll tell a quick story if I have time.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So this one senior vice president of supply chain that I supported the one business unit. And I had been trying for months to express to her that we needed to do level scheduling. I had explained level scheduling until I was blue in the face. And got nowhere. It
Yeah.
didn't matter that I was, saying we have all of this inventory shrinkage, you know, 20% inventory shrinkage is not normal in the rest of the world, but it was normal for them and they had deep pockets, so who cared?
Yeah.
Well, the oil crisis came and gas prices went up. And so we're sitting in the staff meeting and I'm a little frustrated because I'm just having to talk about these small scale projects that we're doing at the model plant. Well, she said, I, I really don't know what we're gonna do. We're blowing through our fuel budget. I said, well, okay. Ding ding ding. Light goes off in my head. Well, why are we using so much fuel? Well, because we're having to go pick up all of we're making all of these deliveries. And I said, well, what are we doing to maximize return freight? Well, we can't do anything because we got to bring out back the product that's damaged and outdated. I said, bingo. Why do we have product that's damaged and outdated? And
Right.
how much fuel would you save if you weren't having to bring it back? And she said, oh my God, we're using fuel to transport dead inventory. I said, bingo, you got it. She said, well, how do we get rid of it? I said, level scheduling. You only make what they need. Change the whole trajectory of my
Yeah.
work.
Well, that's a great lesson, and thanks for sharing that, because that's the difference between pushing a solution and working to find and understand the need,
Exactly.
the internal customer in this case, for your consulting experience and
Exactly.
challenging thoughts. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's how I learned not to push leaders. That I don't need them to be a lean zealot. I need to understand where lean tools solve business problems.
Mhm.
And if I can meet them where they are, solve their problems, their eyes become wide open to all of the other problems.
Yeah. And then maybe, it's kind of a final thing to delve into a little bit. Does that help open the door then to talk about things you mentioned earlier, like leadership and culture and more of organizational transformation?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, once that became that leader's baby,
Yeah.
then, the leader understands that you have to get buy-in to help people understand why they need to do things differently. And that you need to see more of this, people being able to see this and bring that to the leadership or to the organization, or have the autonomy to make those changes as long as it's within the boundaries of their work and scope of their work. So it absolutely changed how that organization or that business unit led.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think that it opened up opportunities to see. This was one of the things that Mr. Yamada taught me. He said, it's important that the people who are working on making improvements for the company have opportunities to promote. And I love telling this story. There was this one manufacturing supervisor that he fought lean. Oh my God, he fought it, fought it, fought it. And then when we started this project around leveling, he fought that too, because he was always rewarded on getting the most production out
Yeah.
and at using the least amount of waste in terms of product yield. And so, I had to help the leadership understand you have to change how you measure people, because as long as you measure him on yield
Hmm.
and output, he's not going to change.
Yeah.
And so that drove some changes there. But this particular manufacturing supervisor had always had a dream. He had worked at the company for 43 years at the time I started working with him. He came in as a teenager
Yeah.
on the line, okay? He had always had a dream of being a plant manager, but told he couldn't be a plant manager because he didn't have a college degree.
Yeah.
When we started down this path and this project, he got so much visibility. Once he finally came on board, he got so much visibility. He helped us, to understand a lot of other nuances from the production aspect that we were able to take and mimic across the system. and he finally was promoted to a plant manager.
Oh, good.
Yep.
They guess they realized he was good enough. They made an exception.
No, they
That
changed the
rule.
rule.
They changed the rule. They changed. Okay.
Yeah, like, why would that hold anybody back if they have the
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah.
And we're now creating a lean culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I often talk to companies about how your succession uh, plans and pathways are right in front of you. You just don't know how to tap into them.
Yeah.
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 So
That's great. So you know you had all those different experiences, and then just to help wrap things up here, nowadays, what industries, what types of companies do you support now in your various coaching and consulting work?
so manufacturing and supply chain will always be my, they have my heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a couple of fun ones. I'm working with a company that works in property preservation for the default mortgage industry.
Hmm.
It's all data transactions, and I'm working with a board certified plastic surgeon in med spa.
Yeah.
So quite interesting in helping a small, organization to increase their profitability and grow and have good stable processes.
Yeah. Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. And where can people find you online if they want to learn more about your work and services you might be able to help them out with?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the best place is on LinkedIn, and it's Crystal Y. Davis. And then our website, theleancoachinc.com.
TheLeanCoachInc.com.
Yes.
So I will put that in the show notes on the blog. Again, that's leanblog.org/363. I'll
Okay.
put it in the comment or the description on the YouTube page. So thank
Oh,
you, Crystal, for not being camera shy. And thank you for having a lot of stories and thoughts and insights to share.
thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And please continue to be safe.
Yes, you too.
All
You,
right. Go
you
help the world
well.
solve some problems, Mark.
You too. Get back at it.
All right. Thank you.